Lord, your people have rejected you, and they've rejected me. They wish for a king. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me.
I'm pretty sure you know this about me, but I was atheist for a good 13 years, I think. From since I could form memories, basically, I didn't believe in God, and because I didn't believe for so long, and any time... And there were believers around, granted there weren't a lot, but there were still people that I knew believed, and any time they'd mention God, I'd be like, whatever, give me evidence. It didn't... I wasn't so much as... I mean, that sounds quite rude. I don't think I was as forthrightly, mean about it, but I just shut it down it was not in a group conversation, but individually, if they ever tried to mention God to me, it was just an instant, stop.
The Life of King Saul is a 7-part series podcast featuring 7 different guests on each episode. After every episode, I will ask a couple of reflection questions that I'd like to encourage you to think and pray over. Episode 1 features a friend of mine, Chayse Whitmore, who I met during work. Chayse is blind, yet as John Newton would put it, he can see. What do I mean by this? Chayse has found Jesus, and what more could he want? But sometimes, like the Israelites, we often desire something else. My name is Tristan, and this is the life of King Saul. Now it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, but his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice.
They're almost like the princes of England, right? People decently look up to them. And speaking of England, it's like during COVID, when Boris Johnson had that party through the lockdown, right? And it was like, it's a similar situation, I assume, to what it would be like with the Israelites when they're looking, they're following the teachings of the land, the culture, the way of life, and then the people that they are the highest members of their society, who they are presumably supposed to look up to, at least not in a godly or worshipping way, or maybe it was, but and admiration, general admiration for, this is how we're supposed to live. These are the people who we should be like. When they're not meeting that level of faith, it would dishearten the whole society.
Yeah, you're so right. They are the example to the rest of the Israelites to counsel them on what is right and wrong. And if they're not setting that example, then, well, where do they look?
Exactly.
It's interesting though, what the elders of Israel do is they seem to take advantage of this to get what they want. Now all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. Samuel, look, you are old, and your sons, They don't walk in your ways. Now make us a king like all the nations around us. Now, every time I read that, I think, what a greeting. Like, you come up to Samuel and the first thing you say is, look, mate, you are old.
You are
And you're,
past it.
yes, basically. And they're saying, you're old and your sons are starting to take over and they're not walking in your ways. So here's the conclusion, or here's the solution that they come up with. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations around us. So was it wrong for Israel and the elders of Israel to want a king? That's my question. What's wrong with it?
Tying back to whether this is a decent analogy or not about the world leaders in today's society, because obviously the Christian nations in the world are not fully Christian like say a Jewish country would be fully Jewish back then, right? And they would all kind of follow the same sets of values. That Samuel presumably wants their king, to only be God. And they don't, he's saying, like, you shouldn't need a human king to watch over you and be basically your false idol, right? Someone you look up to in that way, where you should be looking up to God. Instead, but these Israelites are looking around all the other countries and saying, oh, well, why don't we have that? But they shouldn't, because presumably they're all following God in such a righteous way due to their society. And during that time, where basically did atheists even exist back in those societies?
I don't think they did, eh?
Exactly. So it seems weird that they would seek out a human king rather than God himself. When, so I feel like that's where Samuel's coming from, but also from them. They're looking around, and maybe all of the countries around their country were flourishing with a king and doing well.
Potentially, yeah.
So that could have tied into why they wanted a king so badly for themselves.
It's really interesting, because that's, in my mind, it's a spot-on response. And when I was digging into it, I came across some verses that seem to contradict everything that's currently happening. And it's back in Genesis. And it's Genesis 17. So there's two occurrences in Genesis 17. There's verse 6 and verse 16. Verse 6 says, I will make you exceedingly fruitful. So this is God speaking to Abraham. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I'll make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. Verse 16 then says, and I will bless her, talking about Sarah, Abraham's wife. I will bless her, and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall be from her. Jumping forward, Genesis 35, verse 11 then says, also God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. And so it seems like the context of these verses, God himself is saying to Abraham and to Sarah, I'm going to give you many, many children. There's going to be kings, there's going to be nations that come from you, and it's a good thing. And it seems to be a blessing.
I think God understands that human leaders, because no matter how mighty they may seem or all-powerful they may seem on earth, God could just snap them, right? Like, not even close, right? So
but I think Nebuchadnezzar, right?
Yeah, he's not just so, God's ego is not so fragile that he could have, God probably doesn't even have an ego, right? So it's just like, I think he understands that people need a human leader amongst them. Not everyone can be a follower, because it's like, especially now, and it's so, it can be sometimes easy, but sometimes really hard to relate our world now to ancient Israel, for example, and the differences between how they lived and what they thought, and that was skewing off a little, if I'm allowed to here, is like, back to what you were saying about you feeling like Saul, giving up your place, your seat at God's table for things on earth. I was going to ask, do you think it is much harder to be a God-fearing Christian now than it was, say, 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago?
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean,
I agree.
At all times, Satan has always buffeted God's people and tried to make the narrow way, so to speak, seem very unattractive. And he's done a very good job of that. But in these last days, it's very apparent that he's upped the ante, so to speak. And we have so many more methods of finding ways to sin. In saying that, we do have the reference in the Bible. It says, as in the days of Noah. And it describes that generation just before Noah's, the flood, when Noah entered the ark. They were exceedingly sinful and their thoughts were wicked continually.
Right.
Are we there at this moment? The last days will be compared to that generation where their thoughts are wicked continually. Potentially, I think we're very, very close, if not yes.
Yeah.
However, I think in these last days, we probably have more ways to access sin, easier, I think, particularly specifically sexual sin,
Right.
pornography, that sort of stuff. That's so much
100%.
easier than it was back then. And drugs that I doubt existed back then as well.
Yeah. The burning bush.
Alcohol, they had alcohol, but probably not as readily accessible. We don't have to go out and make it
Didn't
from
have the
scratch.
the Israelite pub.
No, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, just drawing it back to this blessing that God seems to be promising to Abraham and Sarah, that kings shall come from them. What is the problem? Seeing as the Israelites are now asking for a king, and yet God has promised a blessing that nations and kings will come from Abraham. So what is the problem here and now? And I guess the answer for me that I found comes from Deuteronomy 17, 14 to 15. It says, when you come to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, so this is the promise that is given to the Israelites at the Exodus coming out of Egypt.
Right.
So promising the land of Canaan, this land of plenty, which we could liken it to heaven today, where we're hoping to get to heaven. The Israelites were hoping to get to the land of promise. So when they come into the land which the Lord is going to give you, or giving you, and possess it and dwell in it, and say, so God is predicting here and now that they will say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. You shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. And so there's this air of self-entitlement that God is predicting way before the Israelites even ask for a king. He knows that they're going to ask for one. And he's saying, okay, yes, I've made the promise to Abraham. However, it's going to be a king that I choose and in my timing, not before my timing. And I think that goes and rings true for so many things in our lives.
Yeah.
When we try and control them ourselves.
Yeah.
I liken it to, I remember being a child and we would go visit other families, especially like after church or whatever. As a family, we'd go out for lunch to visit another home, and you'd play with the other kids that were there, similar age, and they would bring out their toys. And kids being kids, inherently immature. I mean, I've never met a kid that hasn't, been this way. So typically for me, I'd see a toy that the other child would bring out, and I'm like, man, I really like that toy. And so for me, I knew the parent to ask. It was Dad. Dad was the soft touch. And so I'd go up to him, like I'd pick the right time, I'd pick the right mood that Dad was in, and then I'd present my case, like, Dad, they have this really cool toy, and wouldn't it be cool if we had that toy too? I remember there was this one time, and I was a bit older, and I wanted this Cars, the movie Cars, a video game. And I thought that there was going to be like 4-wheel driving in this video game. And I knew that Dad liked 4-wheel driving. And so I
smart.
presented my case to, yeah, exactly, smart, premeditated, picked the right time.
Yeah.
And I went to Dad, I said, oh, you like four-wheel driving, and we're currently at this four-wheel driving meet at the moment, and, there's this cool video game where I can play four-wheel driving too. And so, you choose the right time. You try and tailor your case to the person that you're presenting the information to.
Yes.
And this is exactly what the elders of Israel are doing. They're saying, Samuel, you don't want us to be a wayward people, and your sons are doing a bad job at keeping us in line.
Exactly. So do you think they had this want, this desperate need or want or desire for a king, that they were waiting until something like Samuel's sons misbehaving and not being righteous to bring it up with Samuel?
Potentially. I mean, I wasn't there. I can't mind read, but
Right, yeah.
I'm putting two and two together.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it very well could have been like that. And I mean, we're human. We do this all the time. And I mean, I think I'm car shopping right now because I've just sold my car. I'm trying to look for a cheaper car to run around in. And so I'm learning that, okay, wait till the dealer has been selling this car for a while, and then you present your case to them. Look, you're trying to sell this car. This car's been sitting there in the lot for like 3 months. Sell it to me cheaper.
The art
and
of
so
war.
Yeah, exactly. The art of war. We're human. We do that. We bargain.
100%. And especially it makes sense that you bring up your childhood because, a lot of kids do that. If they do want something, they will wait until they're smart. In a way, they're smart. Like, emotionally, they're quite onto it, when it comes to knowing when to ask for something. Like, my mum always said, if you ask for something, you won't get it, but if you don't ask for something, you might get it. So she knew it better than us. Like, she knew how to play the cards. And you're right, humans do that all the time, where it's not manipulative. It's just, I mean, is it? It's like we're just quite aware. It's perception, right? Where we take into account the environment and how people are acting, and their scenario and our scenario, and their wants and our wants, and we try to make it the fairest, best outcome for both parties, or all parties, depending on what you're asking for, right?
Well, do we though? I mean, typically we try and get the best for ourselves. I guess
True. I think when it's a kid and parent, it's a bit different. Like, you. I mean, I suppose, yeah. What were you thinking? Did you genuinely want your dad to play with your car's game, or did you just want it for yourself?
I just wanted it for myself,
Right,
and that's being
okay.
honest.
Yeah.
But I knew his
Love the
interest.
honesty.
And I mean, I'm sure the Israelites, and this is, I mean, we're going to come to this very soon. We as humans, we fall back on our feelings, what we can see, how we feel, what we, all our senses.
Yeah.
So, and
4 out of
for
5
the nations are, sorry.
4 out of 5 sometimes.
Well, yeah. If you're missing your sight, then you're four senses. And the Israelites are looking around and they're seeing a tangible leader that they can see in the other nations, and they're wanting that for themselves. And
Are they though? Because, like, you say the leader's tangible, like it's working for them, and it's working.
as intangible, they can see, they can hear, they can, like, it's something physical that's there. And for them and for us, God can be so silent, and without faith, it is impossible to please God. That's the verse in the New Testament.
Yes.
And faith pleases God immensely.
But surely they wouldn't want you don't covet a broken down abandoned building for your house, right?
All I'm basing that off is Deuteronomy, where God says, look, he predicts, Israel, you are going to say in your own hearts, we're going to set a king over ourselves like all the other nations around us. And for whatever reason, that desire within themselves, and I think of sin, like sin, we know the results of sin, and yet we choose to sin sometimes willfully. And it's results is always, not worth it. Yet
Yeah.
we went ahead and did it knowing better.
And we're really dumb in that regard because we'll sin and then we'll feel guilty, especially if you're Christian. Because, I mean, when you're atheist, sin's not even a thing for you, right? Like, it's, yeah. And I guess you would have never known that. Like, sin would have always been not so much a part of your life, but it would have always been a concept that you had and were aware of. But, when we sin, it's like we are guilty and we feel ashamed and we just, I don't know about you, but you just feel just less as a person when and then you feel bad. And then instead of being like, that makes me feel really bad and guilty and terrible, you'd think we wouldn't do that again. But then we're like, oh, actually, that did make me feel terrible, but I forgot about that. And then we repeat it. It's like, why? It's, but no, I get what you mean. The way you said the scripture earlier about, Israel will ask for a king like all the other nations have. It is almost like God's been like, fine, like, you're going to ask for one anyway. It's almost like he expects more of Israel, but he's aware that they will fall into somewhat of an earthly temptation where they say, we are tempted by everyone else's king that we want one of our own, even though as Israel, we should only look to God and God alone.
Why do you love sinners? Why do you lift us again? We're filthy at our best and void of holiness. Why do you sing over us? Why do you dwell with us? Your righteousness you give, a robe of holiness. What is man to deserve the least? Yet you give him everything. Though he spat upon your face, your love, it never changed. You created the moon and the stars and the baby in the womb. Though man denies his creator, he's watching over you.
What did you think from the cross? What were you feeling for us? We're helpless at your feet, in need of mercy.
What is man to deserve the least? Yet you give him everything. Though he spat upon your face, your love, it never changed. You created the moon and the stars and the baby in the womb. Though man denies his creator, he's watching over you. What is man to deserve the least? Yet you give him everything. Though he spat upon your face, your love, it never changed. You created the moon and the stars and the baby in the womb. Though man denies his creator, he's watching over you. Though man denies is his creator. He's watching over you.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Romans 1:18-22. It's interesting that God seems to be comforting Samuel. Like, why would God even say to Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me? It seems like Samuel's somehow taking it a little bit personal. Lord, your people have rejected you, and they've rejected me. They wish for a king. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me. Although they knew God, that's Christians, that's people who profess to know God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful.
And even when it says that his invisible attributes are visible, do you think that is in people that believe in him? Like, because you can tell sometimes, depending if, again, this is the whole real versus regular Christian debate, but it's like when you really are around someone that is righteous, and there's debate on even if anyone's righteous, right? But like, you know, pretty good. It's like, then you know, you can tell, and you can tell if someone's a believer. And do you think that's what it's alluding to? That you can see his invisible attributes in other people?
Absolutely, but I think also more than that too. Like, that's one of many ways.
Yes.
I think we get so used to what we have in front of us. We get what we
100%.
hear, what we smell, what we see. The fact that a newborn baby can exist, we're so used to seeing that.
Yeah.
And we fail to recognize, hold on, that is a miracle before my very eyes.
Yeah.
And so God is saying in Romans 1, I've shown you miracles, but you're just so used to seeing them that you forget me. Just the fruit and the vegetables. We don't just have one single meal. We don't just have like one source of food. We have purple food, we have red food, we have yellow food, you know, shapes and textures, smells, tastes. And I think even that is a blessing, that God knew that we would delight in food, and he gave us taste. It's a blessing.
Yeah.
The sweetness of a grape, the sourness of a lemon, all the contrast, that's a miracle.
Yeah. And when you talk about senses, it's so interesting, because I remember asking, when I was going blind initially, I asked, is it, because I love traveling, and I asked, is it still worth traveling if I go blind? And then the person I was talking to said 100%, because there's the languages, which is audible, there's the smells through your nose, there's all the different cultural foods and the taste and the atmosphere. Like, there's so much more around the world that we observe and take in. And the food is 100, because the food especially is a cornerstone of most cultures, if not every nation, right? It's everyone has that food, and if without it we die. Like it's a cornerstone of life for everyone.
I remember when I went to Malaysia, and this was the first time I went out of New Zealand, and I remember arriving in Malaysia at like 6 a.m. in the airport, and I thought, I need to get outside for some fresh air.
Yeah.
And I went outside and I realized I need to go back inside for some fresh air.
Yeah. Wow.
It was muggy, and that was not just, that's something I couldn't see. And so just tying on to what you said, it's senses, and it's the fact that we have the senses.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what God has done for Israel. He's blessed them, and they don't think that they're blessed anymore because they've become so used to it.
Yeah.
And even if it's not material blessings, the blessing of being with God, having peace, having forgiveness, having a relationship or a knowledge of the true God who can give you true life. And even if your life is falling apart, the fact that you have someone to go to who is real, it's not a carved image like a stone, that is a blessing in itself. Revelation chapter 1. I turned to see the voice that spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the 7 lampstands was one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet, and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. He had in his right hand 7 stars. Out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead.
What an introduction, eh?
Yeah, what an introduction to who Christ is, our King of Kings. And it's really interesting that we've just discussed the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen in the things that he has made. In the description of Christ are things that he has made. Snow, the sun, flames of fire, the sound of many waters. And he's likened to all of these things. His features are described using things that we can comprehend. And we all deserve to fall down as dead before God, as it says there in verse 17. But it's interesting. His response is, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am he who lives and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And it's like a mic drop right there.
Yeah.
But this is our God, this is our King. What we just read, that's a picture of who he is.
Yeah.
And the question is, why would we want anything else? Why would Israel want anything else? And I think of when David took Bathsheba, the words that God used when David was coming back in repentance. And God says to David, look, I gave you your master's house, which is Saul, the guy that we're just going to be studying soon.
Yeah.
I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your keeping. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have given you so much more. And that's a promise to God's people throughout all generations. Look, I've given you blessings, and if that had been too little, if you are faithful to me, I will do so much more for you. And why are you coveting the things of the world, of the nations around you?
Being grateful for anything, even writing a little journal, or it does make you a more humble, more happier person. Gratitude is so important. So I think when God says, look at how much I do for you and you don't even notice me, it's kind of like, you know, be grateful for what you do have, because when it's gone, you're like, oh no, you know, it's like when you have a cold shower, put it on the coldest temperature, and then you're like, whoa, and then you get used to it, and then it gets easier and easier because you're so used to having a hot shower that it's not even nice anymore. Whereas when you get a cold one, boom, it's gone, warmth is gone, and then you really notice it. And even when there's so many questions, you could say like, oh, if God's real, why are you blind? You know, why has he not healed your eyesight? And, you know, that when I first started reading the word, that was a big question for me, because it is hard, you know. It's like, there are things like, oh, if God's all loving and all righteous and all, you know, omnipresent and omnipotent, how can he let so much devastation and suffering happen? But, you know, and when people talk about evidence and things like this, for me, I don't feel, as much as it is a skill in proving your faith and backing it up with things like apologetics, I don't feel the need to prove it to people in my life, because I'm kind of my own evidence.
Lonely, broken heart, rejected or abused, lied to or displaced, manipulated, used, searching for that love that never ever ends, a love that will not let you down, a love that never fails. Know that I am the same, I never change. You were always loved by me when no one seemed to care. There's a special place in my heart that only you can fill.
Voiceless or controlled, unwanted or despised, neglected, left alone, put down or criticized, broken, led astray. You've given everything, but there's a love just waiting to fill your every need.
Know that I am the same, I never
change.
You were always loved by me when no one seemed
To care.
There's a special place in my heart that only you can fill, that you were made to fill. For the aborted, the worn and weary, for the abandoned, the poor and needy, there is a God,
There is a God
whose name is love,
whose name is love,
and his love is deeper, wider, higher. a special place in his heart that only you can fill. You were always, you are
always
A special thank you to Carly Fletcher Music for letting me use this song, Always Loved, in this episode. You've just listened to episode 1 of 7 in the life of King Saul. After every episode, I will ask a couple of reflection questions that I'd like to encourage you to think and pray over. For this episode, Israel was determined to get a king like the nations around them. So the first question is, what things in your own life do you wish or struggle not to covet from the world around you? The second question, if God has convicted you there are idols in your own life that draw you from Him, what should your response be today? My name is Tristan, and this is the life of King Saul.